So today we're going to talk about the crisis in education. If you're homeschooling or you're extra schooling your children or you're just interested in what's going on in education, I hope you'll join me today. Let's get started. Before we get into the crisis in education, I'm going to go over a few production notes here. The first 7 videos that I've done were about using a game called Animal Crossing. It's a Nintendo Switch game to create a memory palace. But I will not be talking as much about memory palaces from now on. We'll be focusing more on the on education issues. But I will be using the memory palace for illustration purposes. It doesn't mean that I won't be going over other memory techniques. We'll be doing lots of that. And I will still have the dream addresses of the 3 islands in the description, and I will be updating them from time to time. So if you have any questions about that, you can just ask me. And I will give a few updates probably at the end of our discussions on education, just for fun. Okay. Today is Groundhog Day, which I find really appropriate if you've ever seen the movie Groundhog Day, which I love. And I love Bill Murray. He's one of my favorite actors, favorite comedians. Education is a lot like starting over every year. Okay, so I like the connection between the two, and the fact that we're starting a new series on this day just tickles me pink. So, all right. So, what is the crisis in education? Actually, it's many things. So, let's start talking about that. So, let us look at the my definition of education. Education consists of culture, instruction, and experience, leading to a love of wisdom, a sustainable vocation, and a desire to understand humanity's tellus. I have this logo that I've been using here. The book stands for education. The inner circle here are the tools of education, and the outer circle are the goals of education. Culture tells us what we are to teach to our children. Instruction are the methods of teaching, and experience is really the process of learning. All right, and these should lead to a love of wisdom. We want our children to choose correctly in life. A sustainable vocation. That is, we want our children to be able to support themselves and their families, and a desire to understand humanity's tellus, its purpose. This does not mean their individual purpose. That has more to do with their vocation, but the tellus of humanity in general. So that's my definition. And we're going to talk about where our education system is breaking down in these areas today. All right, so we're going to put those 6 words down. So first we're going to talk about instruction, culture, experience. These are our tools when we're teaching. Instruction. When we think of instruction, we generally think of the 3 R's. It's reading, writing. I'm going to capitalize the R here. That's our second R. And arithmetic, the 3rd R. Okay, so there's more to instruction than the 3 R's, but the 3 R's are the simplest part of education in the sense that they are decoding. They are decoding subjects. All right, you're teaching children to decode writings on a paper, of reading, writing, and then it's teaching the skill of being able to give them back to you right now. So we recognize that there is a serious crisis in education because even on this level, we're failing. Reading scores after the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, are a disaster in many areas. So why are we even failing at this level? This should be something we should be able to bring most children up to speed. My mother, who was a fourth grade teacher in public school many years ago, she told me that the fifth grade teachers would ask, them to just get them reading and that they would get them all up to speed after that. So even 20, 30 years ago, this decoding problem was already very evident. All right, so we know that's a problem. So if you are homeschooling or extra schooling your children, these are the 3 things to start with first. All right, everything else, if you get those straightened out, a lot of other things will clear up afterwards. All right, not everything. There's safety issues in the schools, fentanyl problems, all kinds of safety issues, and other cultural issues. But start there. At least it gives you something to focus on first. All right, so next we're going to talk about culture. Oh, yeah. Next we're going to talk about culture. And when we talk about culture, we are talking about religion, religion, philosophy. Goodness, I can't spell. Pretend it says philosophy. History, arts, fine arts, and languages. Okay. Of course, we know our big problem with this is that we're a multicultural society. In the past, there were, in the past, people generally taught their own culture or sent their children to schools or had tutors that taught their own children in their one culture. Now we have a multicultural issues going on where they sometimes conflict with each other. So generally what happens is culture just doesn't happen. We have a thing called social studies, which is how to get along in the classroom with multicultural problems. All right, this is not any one of those subjects, and so they're getting lost. So again, homeschooling, extra schooling, you feel that your school is deficient in these areas, you can start to work on that, but not before you finished with the decoding problems. Okay, that has to be a priority. Children catch up very quickly once they can read and do basic arithmetic. All right, so that's where you should be focused. All right, now, oh yeah, one more thing about multicultural. It's not going away. It's a value that we have in this country that we should be able to relate to different cultures. We just have to learn a different way of approaching it. We have to rework our thinking on education. So hopefully some of the material that we're covering here and in this series will help us to see how those differences can be overcome. All right. Okay, and the last thing is experience. Put that down as okay, experience. These are arts such as performing arts, where you're actually doing things. Okay, painting, drawing, that kind of thing. Also, phys ed, performance. Let me write that down. Phys ed, sports, God, I hope you can hear me when I turn away from the microphone. Home ec, shop. These aren't even offered anymore. Okay. So this is what we're talking about with experience. All right. Problem with this, they're not considered important. They're considered extras. I think the drawing is really important. I think the sports are really important. There should be at least one sport. I don't think kids' times have to be filled up all day long, but I used to have my kids try at least one sport. Homeschooling defensive arts like Taekwondo are generally very popular. Um, because they help instill discipline. It's very hard being the mother and the teacher or the father and the teacher of children because they really are different roles, and you can't commiserate with a child over a homework assignment as the mother and the teacher. It's very hard to tell them about, to give them cookies and tell them, well, that's a mean old teacher, but you really have to do this work. Okay. I can't even begin to tell you about that. So somehow we muddled through. All right. All right. Now now we need to talk about the goals. All right. We're just going to go. This is just going to be an overview. So, all right. Tell us. Everybody's got a different idea of where humanity's supposed to go. Elon Musk thinks we're going to, go out to the stars. I used to believe that myself. Other religions try to tell us what happens to us after we die, what our purpose is on this planet. There are many ideas out there about what we're here for. Why are we here? Why is there something rather than nothing? These are ancient questions, and we're still trying to answer them. We are very limited in our abilities to understand these things, so we have to think about them. It's important to think about these things, and we'll discuss why that's so later on. But right now, we're just talking about what telos is. And telos comes from our culture studies. All right. At least it should help us to start to understand that. And again, because we're a multicultural society, we need to find a way to help children understand the questions about telos so that they can begin to find the answers for themselves. All right, now we have wisdom. Well, wisdom. This also comes from our culture studies. We want our children to make the right decisions in life. They are not always going to do that, but we want to give them the tools to get back on track if they do. So we hope that even though they don't pay attention to what we tell them now, they will remember these things later on. And a lot of this is brought through storytelling. And so literature is a very important subject and one that is usually guided by our culture. And this becomes a problem in schools, that storytelling is generally limited to stories about children going to school and getting along with other children. And the rich literature that's part of our culture, that's part of many other culture, is just not being taught. So we know also that a vocabulary is very dependent upon the types of stories and the sophistication of the stories that are being told. We have children getting into college who don't know what a theme is. They don't know what a synopsis is. The storytelling is just getting lost. So that's something that needs to be worked on as well. We will get into that in greater detail in later videos. All right, but here we come to vocation. Okay. Vocation is the biggie. All right. We don't talk about vocation much in education. The underlying issue is always for parents. What do my children need to know in order to get a good job or to be happy in their jobs? When I went to school, we were supposed to, follow our dreams. They're still teaching that. Okay, that's great. When I went to college, my undergraduate degree is in physics. There's no jobs in physics. All right. I was lucky that I had a lot of computer science in my course study, and I was hired by a subcontractor for the military that did guidance systems. They did the guidance system for the space shuttle. But I left because I was too young and inexperienced to know that that was probably my dream job. And I don't regret my choices because they've led me to where I am today. But I really didn't know. You just don't, there's just not a lot don't know when you come out of school. So, but anyway, vocation. What is the big thing about vocation? We really need to talk about that. All right. So let's talk about vocation. Okay. We want our children to have a job that pays well, makes them happy. Yeah, that's the dream of every parent. Okay, I know this well myself. Okay, so what are the jobs that are valued? In the past, the top level of education was um, vocations in law, medicine, and architecture. All right. And today, what are the big jobs considered? They are generally considered technical jobs today. Let's write it up today. Today, technical jobs. Oops. How do you spell technical? Technical. Computers, you know, in engineering jobs, um, pharmacology, or they're all technical jobs. The one thing both the past and today they have in common are they are knowledge jobs. Okay, they're knowledge combined with skills. All right, they're not just labor jobs like plumbing or electricians or whatever. Although those are very good jobs, I'd be happy if my kids were any of those jobs too. Not a problem. But today, these are what's considered the top jobs. So there's still a great deal of focus on academic knowledge in the schools. And I just don't see how you're going to get past that in a practical level. And so again, parents and other adults interested in a particular child's education need to fill in gaps as they see them. Right? As an institution, this is what parents in general want. They want all of their kids to be doctors and lawyers or computer scientists or CEOs or whatever, and they all believe it's surrounded by whatever the top knowledge of the day is. In the past, to get to the law, medicine, architecture, you basically went through something we called a classical education. You studied Greek, Latin. It wasn't just studying the languages, you were reading the literature of ancient times in the as original sources. All right, so that was very important because you not only got the language development and grammar and all of that, you got a intensive literature study. And we tend to think of these languages as not necessary today, but all of our thinking is built on what was written before us. And the Greek and Latin languages were the language of philosophy for several thousand for at least 2,500 years. All right, and by the time I got to high school, they were already dropping Latin. And the reason why was because it was called a dead language, but there are advantages to learning a dead language. It doesn't change over time the way, our speaking languages do. So, one of the problems of not reading original sources is that everyone interprets them as they read themselves. You have interpreters of interpreters of interpreters. We'll talk about problems with that. Now, we can't really overcome that. I couldn't teach my kids Latin and Greek. I have real trouble learning a different language. This is a typical problem being American. We just don't hear other languages enough, and it's a mistake of not trying to immerse ourselves into other languages. Whether you want to do it on, French or Spanish or German or whatever, the process of learning another language makes it easier to start to learn another language. So I still think it's important. I wish I was better at it. If I had to do it all over again and I had the money, I would have hired a tutor to teach them, probably Spanish, and I would have gotten a program for Latin, because I would have thought those were the two practical things that they should learn. Anyway, education before you got into the upper levels was considered something that you taught the whole person. They were learning enough math that they could converse with other educated people. It was considered a whole person, and you're teaching the whole person. Now, the problem that we have today is that there was an explosion of knowledge, about 500 or so years ago. This coincided with the printing press, Descartes, and Newton. The printing press was important because the ordinary person could now read things that educated people could read. So even though you still had your job and what you had to do, you could start to develop a small library. And this rapidly increased our technical knowledge. It spread the technical knowledge through the general population. It wasn't just reserved for the top and the top classes. And this also coincided with the development of the middle class. So these things are highly connected. In the last 500 years, this is tremendous technical growth. And because of that, you have this different idea of what is necessary knowledge for a vocation. It goes from a classic, what we call classical education, to a technical education. And it's much more mechanistic. So we think in terms of the human person as being a machine. The world is a machine. Everything is a machine. We start to study English or whatever the contemporary language is of the day. We choose that over the classic languages of Greek, Latin. It's actually German, French, and English that starts to happen, but what the languages people are speaking rather than the ancient languages. Okay. Okay, and we're moving from learning about the whole person to a more uh, mechanistic approach to all problem solving. Mechanistic techniques. All right. So you begin to see this even in books and papers on education that we're becoming a technical society. We're again focused on techniques or how to do things rather than why we do them. Part of the problem also why there's not time to talk about the whole person. This is ideally, this is what we would want to do, because we don't want to give up our washing machines and our planes and our cars and stuff. But we don't have the time to do both whole person and all of the technical knowledge. And then you start to see this, especially after World War II, when people started, when people began in great numbers to start attending college. It became nobody who had time to invest 8, 10 years in a full education when the economy needed people with technical knowledge. So when I got to college, I wasn't even required to take a philosophy class, for example, or a literature. I think I took a science fiction class. All right. All of my classes were physics, math, or science in some form or other. And this really hurt my education because, well, we'll get into that later. But okay, so there's a crisis in education. There's also a crisis in physics, and part of it is because it's philosophical. All right. And it's beginning to be addressed. It's a serious problem. There, physics has made advances, and I don't think it's quite the dark ages that people say that it was, but it was a difficult time in school for philosophical reasons. We'll talk about that because it's a subject that I'm interested in and also relates to many other issues in education. All right, but the good thing about the physics problems is that they don't really start until college. All right, so for for elementary and high school, you just teach them the reading, the writing, and the math, higher math. Okay, they don't need to get into quantum mechanics. To really do physics, you need calculus, and kids don't really learn calculus till their first year of college. Sometimes in an AP course, in their last year of high school, they can be learning that too, but they're really focused on that, and they're still focused on Newtonian mechanics, which is solid. It's solid in specific ways that has led to our boom in technology. So it's important, and that's a good thing to learn. And the other issues in physics are starting to straighten themselves out, so that's good. All right. The other thing in the past, again, you're dealing with one culture, and today we're dealing with multiple cultures. So it's easier to focus on technical things than it is on cultural things and cultural problems. So that's another reason why. It's so, path of least resistance, as we call it, or, avoiding conflicts. And one of it is just to fill up the time with problems that have nothing to do with, working out or understanding cultural issues. All right. Okay. So that's that for now. So now I'm going to look at an old slide that we used in video 3. If I can find it. Okay, here it is. All right. So here we're going to talk a little bit again about convergent and divergent problems, especially as it relates to education. We talked about convergent problems are problems that are limited to non-living things. And that includes math problems, construction problems, physics problems. And then there are divergent problems, problems which involve living things, world hunger, falling in love, raising children, government conflicts, that kind of thing. Education is also a divergent problem. Another thing about convergent and divergent problems is this. Convergent problems have solutions. 1 and 1 equals 2. Okay, so I have 2 rocks. All right. Whatever I do, I mean, I can break them, okay? But these are 2 rocks. They're not going to change. 1 rock and another rock makes 2 rocks. 1 solution. This is why we love non-living problems, math problems, physics problems for the most part. They deal with non-living things which don't change very quickly on us. Now, I know over hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, these rocks will change. They'll either, get stuff added to them or they'll wear away, whatever. Mostly during my lifetime, they will pretty much look like this. All right, things are changing all the time, but we have a sense of permanence, and that involves non-living things like rocks. All right. Divergent problems do not have simple solutions. Any decision to address these problems requires a balance of needs, expectations, and compromise. So they're complicated, and we would love to have one solution to these divergent problems. And every time we try to impose one, we find that it doesn't work. And this has been going on in education for a very long time, trying to find one solution, one way to teach reading, one way to teach math. And this is why we get into these issues with trying different methods, as if one method would solve the problem for 20 children sitting in a classroom. And hopefully that's all you had. I mean, when I was in school, there were upwards of 40 children in a classroom. Now, they tried to solve this problem by ability. All right. So if you did well in school, they put you with other children who did well. This did make teaching easier, but it didn't allow for a mixture of different ideas. You find children who are not academically gifted are often gifted in other ways. But again, we still have that knowledge vocation problem going on. When you're in school, the focus is on whatever knowledge the education departments and the parents feel are going to get you to a successful job. Now, how well they do that or how well they decide on those things is really not the issue. That is what it's an emotional issue, not so much an intellectual issue. But it's something you always have to be aware of. Okay, and so to illustrate this point, we're going to take a little trip to Memoria for a little bit. And here's Professor. She's wearing a graduation cap. And look what's here. It's a jester's cap. So come over here. We're going to trade her scholar's cap for a jester's cap, because I want to make this point. All right, so this little area is in our instruction vocation area, kind of next to each other. I have put together 3 items that in the past were our knowledge areas, our knowledge subjects. Medicine, that's what the skeleton stands for. Architecture, it's a box of, I don't know, drawing materials an architect would use. And then the stone tablet, that stands for law. So medicine, architecture, and law. And then over here, more what we think of today as our knowledge, our knowledge subjects, and those would be include technology. All right, so I am going to actually place the jester's cap by the robot arm. I'm going to take it off first. All right. And so I'm going to place it here. Okay, so this is where engineers hang out. So the point of all of this is that if it could be proven that going to clown school or comedian school would get you a better job, I assure you that the education department and most parents would want their children to take those classes. And this is not to offend comedians or clowns. I'm sure they will get the joke. However, this is a reality about the relationship between vocation and education. If it's really something that people think will get you a good job, parents will want their children to learn it. And one more thing about that. Sometimes we think real education is going on in the classrooms, but because we are not there observing it, we don't know. And this is another reason why children fall behind. Because often both parents have to work and there's no time to find out what's going on at the schools. So as we have discussed in our Memory Palace design videos, putting in a strong visual will help us remember this point. Whatever people in general think will get their children a good job, that is what they will want to see in their schools. And okay, so what I'm trying to tell you is if your child is actually struggling in school, it's not always the teacher's fault. It's not always the education's fault. It's not your child's fault. There's just a fit that's not working there. And you have to work on finding ways to help that child along. In homeschooling, we usually call this the rule of three. You would try one method with one child, it would work. You try the same method with another child, it wouldn't work at all. I had one child who refused to use flashcards. I don't even know what to do with that. I had to come up with another game-like thing for teaching her how to do flashcards. And it's funny because years later, and when she was in college, she was putting flashcards together for a class, and she called me up and she says, "Mom, I really don't like flashcards, and I don't ever remember you using them with me." And I just laughed because, yes, of course I tried flashcards. But she just laughed at me and walked away. And what do you do with a child like that? Do you crush their spirit? Do you force them to use flashcards? I mean, there are other methods to learn your times tables and your addition tables than flashcards. So I found a good one, and it worked for her. And she's actually very good at math. She just hates flashcards. So, you can't always have a public school classroom geared to each child. These teachers are dealing with 20 different students. That would be 20 different methods. And sometimes that is exactly what you need, but who can split themselves up 20 different ways for every single subject? And I should know because I had that problem myself for 6 children, and it was just crazy. But that's, we do the best that we can and we hope for the best. All right. But I think the more we know about these problems and aware of them and discuss them, the more we can find better pathways for each child. All right. All right. If you want to read more about the ideas of convergent and divergent problems, I recommend this little book called A Guide for the Perplexed. And we've talked about it before. It's worth reading. Tiny little book. So in summary for today, I'm gonna just take a breath about education. If you are involved in the education process of a child, the first 3 things to focus on are the reading, writing, and arithmetic, the 3 R's. Get those down and work on those. The second thing is literature. Pick good literature and have them read it, discuss it, analyze it. Okay, if you don't know how to do that, find something about analyzing literature. If reading is not a strong suit for them, plays, Shakespearean, going to see the play, even local productions. I know we don't do any of that as much as we used to. Even if you find it boring, take them to that. Go to the museums, whatever you can do, enlist other family members to do these things. These are all important. Skills, whatever family skills are there, if you have special skills, music skills, don't think any of them are not important. Cooking skills, balancing a checkbook, anything that are life skills, or or any skills that your family has possession of is something to be passed along. No matter how menial or unimportant you think it is, if it's a skill, it's valuable. They will use it somewhere. Those are the important things. We want to recognize that some children have learning disabilities that do not clear up right away, and we don't want them falling behind too much. But we need to find another way of integrating them into the upper grades once they have accomplished their reading levels and their math levels. I think that would be a better approach. There's too much movement back into pushing kids back instead of bringing them up. A lot of kids, once they are able to read, even if it's at a later age than younger kids, catch up quickly. All right, so but anyway, that's a separate a specific issue that needs to be addressed by the parents, the teachers, and the schools. Just be aware of it. All right? But the decoding issues are the first issues that you want to help resolve. If the child is delayed in those developments due to some learning issue, you're gonna have to do a lot more work with them. All right, that's not that they can't do on their own. There was a story I read of a pediatric surgeon. He never overcame his reading difficulties. He cannot read, but he is a pediatric surgeon. He has a fantastic memory, and he had people read to him, and he dictates everything. So, I mean, you just don't know. You don't know. A reading problem is not a impediment to all vocations. But those are the exceptions too. We have to remember that not everybody has a fantastic memory. This is why I started this with the Memory Palace, to help improve long-term memory. And we will continue talking about those memory techniques as well. And of course, the Memory Palace is not just for memory retention. It is also to help you organize the information that you have. I've said in earlier videos that because there's so much broken in education, that the material, I have difficulty organizing the material because it's all interrelated. And so you can't talk about culture instruction without talking about culture. You can't talk about culture without talking about experience, that kind of thing. And yet there's things about those different subjects that need to be talked about separately. So that was one of the reasons why I started with the Memory Palace. And I will continue building my little memory palaces, but we are going to, from now on, discuss more about education, all kinds of aspects of education. And it affects us all through our lives, so it's really a lifelong process. I hope these words are encouraging for you, and I hope that you don't give up in the struggle for a better education. All right, that's all for now. See you next time.